Öncelikle herkese merhaba. Sunumu İngilizce yapacağım ama ilk defa Türkiye'de sunum yaptığım için önce bir Türkçe ile başlayayım dedim. Peter'ın da anlattığı gibi annem Türk, baba İngiliz. O yüzden geçen gün Tanyer Bey'in de anlattığı gibi kadının gücü ve Türk kadının gücünü birebir gördüm benim için. Tabii uzakta yaşamanın, yurt dışın yaşamanın zorluklarıyla Türkçeyi evde, kültürü unutmamak, yani iki ülke arasında Türkçeyi unutmamak ve bizi Türkiye ile bağlı tutmanın önemini gösterdi. O yüzden onu hatırlatmak istedim. Sunumu İngilizce yapacağım. Kusura bakmayın, zaman kısıtlı, şimdi takılırım dedim arada. O yüzden teşekkürler şimdiden ve başlıyoruz. So about a year and a half ago, Chanel did a fashion shoot in Paris, and Karl Lagerfeld, the creative director, set it in a data center. So having worked in the data center industry since 2011, we're very conscious that we're the infrastructure layer of the world. So it's a very exciting industry. Our customers are generally more exciting than we are. That's the issue we have. So we're very excited to have a cool brand like Chanel put something in a data center. But it was very interesting what he said about why he did that. And the reason he did that was about imagining your life without the phone, the smartphone, and the next step being AI and robotics. But more than that, what I think it shows is the consumerization of IT and tech. So be it fashion, be it sport, be it everything we do, the technology world is coming and seeping through into everything. And for millennials, and if I look at my nephews and in London, they're growing up with the iPad. When they're tiny, they're able to do stuff and open pictures, shorten pictures, way more than we even dreamed of. Me growing up, you're looking at initial email. I remember when email first started. And the sheer speed of that change is what's phenomenal. And I think that's what people are really grappling with at the moment. And again, I think there's a lot of fear around technology. But I think the exciting part, and I'll touch on it towards the end, the exciting part of being in Turkey, in my opinion, because it's similar to a lot of the emerging markets we see in Asia, is we're living in probably one of the, if not the most exciting times in the world, and you're also within one of the most exciting regions. So, if you add those two together, whichever careers or industries you're in, it's a pretty good time to be alive. So you could go back to the previous industrial revolutions and say, during those times, people were probably thinking this is a pretty big change. So if you go to mechanical production, if you then go on to the mass production in terms of electrical energy, and then of course 69, 70, the technology world starts coming in terms of IT and automation. However, Klaus Schwab, who coined this in the World Economic Forum, he says something interesting. He says the industrial revolution we're living now is going to affect the very essence of our human experience. So the speed and the development of what's happening is not going to impact specific industries or geographies. It's the human level. Everything's going to change. And the speed of that change, which we'll touch on, is pretty phenomenal. So bottom right is interesting. We were formed in 2004 in San Francisco. We're now $34, $35 billion company. We didn't exist in the year 2000. And if you look at what the CEO of Accenture says, digital is driving over half of the companies in the Fortune 500 have gone since the year 2000. And I haven't got the slide, but you probably have seen it in other presentations. You can put it up there. Maybe some of the oil giants, but all of the other logos are new. Google, Facebook, Microsoft, Amazon, they're all new companies. And we will eventually touch on the Chinese giants as well. So I don't know how many of you like the futurist trends, but one writer to definitely follow and read a lot of his stuff is Ray Kurzweil. So Ray Kurzweil is probably one of the most important thinkers, at least of the last 50 years, maybe. He's now chief engineer and designer at Google. And in his book, Singularity is Near, he presents this, which is his view of the countdown to singularity. So the singularity is the point where machine intelligence is going to surpass human intelligence. Now, the issue with this is, you'll see, and he starts very, very early. He starts with the single cells in terms of when the Earth started. it's the sheer speed of development. So if you go back to the 1980s, 1990s, and they talk about Moore's law and the doubling of transistor powers, they said around this time, 2010, 2015, 2020, the exponential growth of technology is going to be at such a speed, it's going to be difficult to keep track. And I would suggest that's happening now. We talk about how every 3 to 6 months something's changing in terms of technology, and let alone with AI as well. So again, if we look at the Forbes CEO survey, 72% of CEOs, the next 3 years are going to be more important than the last 50. Again, the exponential growth of technology and impact on industries. And in our world, which is how do we create the infrastructure layer to be able to power this, how do we have the servers to be able to do it, we're pretty conservatively, based on the amount of servers we have and we know our customers have in our buildings, there's going to be probably need about 400 million new servers. Because if you look at Gartner or if you look at Cisco, there's going to be anything from 25 to 50 billion connected devices in the next 3 years. And we're already well onto that track. You think about wearables, connected cars haven't started in full pelt, and we haven't seen houses yet in terms of the whole connected devices piece really get going. It's starting, but we haven't hit the crescendo yet. And the whole reason for this change, and this is why in our industry we call it a tsunami of data, is because we're moving very rapidly from a human to machine to machine interactions. So one of the industries we see this most prominent is the financial services and financial trading industry. So in America, they're actually bulldozing through mountains to try and get that straight line fiber cable to allow two buildings to speak to each other just that millisecond quicker. Because that millisecond quicker will allow a trader to make millions, if not hundreds of millions, on a trade before somebody else. And this isn't people trading. If you look at high-frequency trading, it's machines. Servers are trading with each other. That's why there was a big issue in the UK recently, when the stock market was just based on an algorithm looking at something incorrectly, caused the stock market to dip. It's algorithms, which is quite scary, algorithms tracking news reports, tracking news industries, and putting bets on trades, fully machine to machine. And then if you go to smart agriculture, smart city, intelligent buildings, these are all going to be machines turking. So another example from the UK, elderly livers in home, when they go to the fridge, for example, a big problem in the UK, a big positive point in Turkey, in my opinion, elderly stay with families. In the UK, loneliness is an issue. Elderly, generally, they push them to old homes, unfortunately, or they live alone. When they live alone, they're at risk of death at home because nobody's coming to see them. What they've started is when the fridge door doesn't open for a set amount of period, that sends a message to the local hospital or the local GP. So this is just one example of a connected device, and there's many, many more that will come. Again, I don't know which metric you want to look at, but we could look at all of them. They're all double-digit. The big one that gets us very excited is the bottom right one, which is mobile data traffic, and we'll touch on why Turkey is important in that regard. All of the emerging markets are 46% compound annual growth rate of mobile data, going right up to 2021. A huge tsunami of mobile data that's got to be analyzed, transferred, and used. And then you look at the market, industrial values, so artificial intelligence market forecast. Whole new industries being born and trillions of dollars of worth. And I'll touch on it in a moment in the bottom right, AR, augmented reality and virtual reality. So the use of headsets, just in terms of what's shipped now, in terms of what's going to be shipped. And we'll see it, I touch on one of the Hollywood films that Spielberg did recently. More and more augmented reality and virtual reality, not just workplace, but how we live day to day is going to impact everything. if we talk of Asia now, and what I want to touch on a little bit on this presentation is something when you work in Asia or you're selling or trying to buy from the Chinese, they've got a term which has been thousands and probably tens of thousands of years of trading, which is called guanshi, which is the relationship-based selling and buying. It's very different to just talking about it as relationships, but it's a full network of buying. When we look at what they're doing around the tech side of that in terms of enabling it, there's a massive war at the moment around AI. And the US and China is pretty much head-to-head for many years around patent publications, research publications. What's very interesting in the last few years, and the right graph is the one that's most interesting for me in terms of last year, is the sheer cash they're putting in terms to new ventures. So a little later on in the presentation, we'll look at facial recognition technology. And now the most valuable AI startup in the world is Chinese. It's called SenseTime. And it's a technology that recognizes faces and analyzes that using AI. So Alibaba just put X $100 million into it, and it's now worth $3 billion. And then if you look at the intelligence behind AI, you look at any of the US and university and academia, you look at any of the Australian academia, you look at Britain as well, it's Chinese professors. They may have grown up in the UK, they may have grown up in the US, but this Chinese tsunami of AI is coming. You've got Fei Lei, who's Google's chief AI, and then one of my favorites, Andrew Ng, who's Baidu for many years, and also started Cloudera, which you may be aware of.
It's called Musical.ly.
In a hole where they can't say nothing. 1, 2, 3, they gonna run back to me.
$60 million teens are on Musical.ly.
I love Musical.ly. It's a great app.
我觉得我的中文说得比川普好，
人工智能正在改变世界。
大家觉得呢？
China's largest voice recognition software developer, iFlyTech, currently has over 100 million users.
China's autonomous car is on its way to America. Tech giant Baidu, also known as the Google of China, will soon start testing self-driving vehicles in the US.
China actually announced its AI strategy. By 2030, they will dominate the industries of AI. Trust me, these Chinese people are good.
So the war is very much on, and we see it across Asia, but globally now, there's no getting away from the whole impact that AI is having. Bringing it back to our world to just give you a bit of a color before we move in terms of the digital guanshi and the tactics being used in Asia. This is Google servers, but generally in our world, this is what we see in our buildings. So all of the AI revolution and machine learning is based on a huge amount of data. And interestingly, if you look at a Google, if you look at a Facebook, even if you look at a Microsoft for that matter, they're not too worried about disruption on that front, because nobody can get their data. That's why you'll see they open source and outsource the algorithms a lot, because you're not going to get the data Google has. You're not going to get the data Instagram has ever, potentially. Instagram, that's why Instagram hashtag is a lot and pulls a lot of the hashtags in its Instagram feeds, because that's feeding into the AI and teaching it constantly. The data usage for that is phenomenal. So the heat generated by the servers are changing from our traditional customers, which are financial services, banks, to much hotter and denser. And we'll see there's also a war on in terms of the physical microprocessors and the chips that have to power these machines. So us, Digital Realty, based in San Francisco, 205 data centers across the world, as I mentioned, formed in 2004. So the sheer digital disruption we've seen from that time is phenomenal. So you'll see our customer list and the customers we have. Facebook is an interesting one. Very early on, came to us 2005, 2006, when they were still growing, still on the growth phase. Similar with number 18, Uber. They came very small to us as an app company. And now they've got servers and they've got literal floors and even buildings, very different parts of the world, to power their infrastructure and the data they pull. Industries-wise, financial services still very strong, but there's one industry that's growing without a doubt, which is the cloud. And there's one region that's growing more than any other, and that's Asia Pacific. So we're still the smaller part of the pie. 70% of the data centers are in North America. About 20% is in Europe. But this is where we're moving the fastest. So we literally are building as quickly as we can across the whole region. So we've just gone into Japan with a joint venture with Mitsubishi Corporation. We've data centers in Osaka, Hong Kong, Singapore, Melbourne, and Sydney. And Asia Pacific is unique because apart from Australia, you can't build data centers like you would in most Western locales, which is campus models. You have to build up. So our Singapore data center is 6 floors. The building itself, with all the kit inside, is probably worth $1.5 billion. And you have to build up. And Singapore is very humid, so you have a huge amount of cooling infrastructure. And I don't know if time will allow, but I'll touch on towards the end, if I can, the whole ecological impact of this data usage. So every high-res cat video on YouTube, every short clip has an impact that has to sit somewhere. Even if you put it onto the cloud, that is sitting in a physical building, and it's using a huge amount of electricity. So after the airline industry, I think we're number 3. But give it time. We're going to be one of the industries that uses the most electricity in the world. That's why when we build the buildings, we're looking at how we can use free air cooling, how we can reuse the water that comes around our buildings and rains down, and really how we can use renewable energy. It's a big push for us across the world at the moment. So this is the Osaka building. Unfortunately, similar to Turkey, a very seismic country, seismically prone. So building construction is very much reinforced. Interesting thing as well around Osaka and Tokyo is there's 2 electricity grids. So Osaka has become a very hotbed for technology and hosting. When the tsunami struck, the electricity grid was on the south, but obviously Tokyo was out. So these buildings are really driving the infrastructure layer of the digital world. This is the same building when finished. And just to give you, again, a size of scale, everything is bigger in the US, as we know. 1.1 million square foot, that's actually 2 US aircraft carriers, can literally fit into the Ashburn campus. The reason Ashburn is key is because about 80% of the world's internet passes through Ashburn. It's where the internet was born. And talking about the internet being born, it's quite interesting, again, going to Asia versus the West. When the internet was born, the reason the US can lead the internet is because the whole regulations and wraparound and protocols for the internet are led by the US. What you're seeing now is China, not ethics, which Europe and Macron and Europe are trying to play catch up and work around the ethics of AI. The literal protocols of how AI will work is what China's trying to grasp. If they get control of that, they control AI, how the US pretty much controls the internet today. So that's an interesting thing to keep an eye on as well in the coming years. So in terms of the physical buildings we're in and what's driving this digital world, the other big battleground, which is very much tied to everything, tied to AI, tied to machine learning, is the battle around processors. So you'll see the top one, which is Google's Tensor unit. Then you've got NVIDIA, which is the graphic cards. Generally, graphic cards, much more powerful chips. That's why AI will always use graphic cards. And then bottom right is Intel's trying to do a neural type chip mimicking the human brain. So the chip war as well is just going crazy at the moment. In our world, which is the physical, bringing the technology together, we're actually talking about data lakes. So the massive amount of data needed for machine learning, and then bringing that with the design and infrastructure that can hold and mine it. So moving to Guanxi, that's how it's written in Mandarin. This is how they probably traded many, many years ago. And what we're seeing now in terms of the modern networks, and I'll touch on the logo on the bottom right there, which is WeChat. In China now, they're targeting and they're using the whole Guanxi around connections and relationships. So that's the two characters. And it's thousands of years of trading. And you'll see when you do any business with large Chinese corporates, it's still about the relationship. You can't jump right into the sale. You know, even in London, in the West, you can have maybe a meet at an event, you can send the salesman, sales lady, and you can have the sales discussion pretty quick. In China, which is the shadow across the whole rest of Asia, you've got to build a relationship, and it's constant. You've got to meet the buyer, you've got to meet the seller constantly, and that relationship is pretty much what we're seeing today. And that's what they're doing a great job of as well, in my opinion, in the whole of that region. When you look at how they're connecting with buyers as well, it's not a single tool. That's probably what is very interesting for me in the whole of the Asia-Pacific region. So one that might surprise you is Indonesia. So one of the largest growth markets in South Asia, 260 million people. Internet usage-wise, they've probably got 80, 90 to 100 million, massive mobile usage penetration, similar to Turkey, massive Facebook penetration. They use BBM, BlackBerry Messenger, is the biggest tool, 55 million active users a month. Rest of the world, BlackBerry is going off. Various reasons for that. You go to China, and I'll touch on it in a moment, WeChat is pretty much untouchable in terms of numbers. Close to 500 million users now. And then Southeast Asia, again, when you look at Thailand or Philippines or South Korea, different apps. So any of the sellers in the Asia-Pacific region is having to look at all these different digital channels and build its go-to-market accordingly. One of the guanxi, or the modern guanxi tools being used, geotagging. So a hotel in Singapore, one of the things it does, which is very interesting, it casts a GPS net over the hotel and actually pulls all of the people's feeds as they stay. Got to be public, so not their private feeds. But let's say they shared something on Instagram, a meal, or their experiences of the hotel. The hotel customer service is pulling that feed for the management. And if they didn't like something on Twitter or Instagram, it tries to respond. Obviously, if it's very good, then they'll try and retweet it or reshare it. Uber versus Grab. I wanted to touch on this because we work with one of the companies, we don't yet, but hoping to work with the other one. So Uber tried to get into China, didn't work. You might have read, came to an agreement with Didi Chuaqiang there. Same has happened in South Asia. Very recently, it's just been signed off by the Singaporean competitive legislation. They've come to an agreement with Grab. We saw months and years of competition in Singapore where they were really having a race to the bottom in terms of prices. Grab has been untouchable in South Asia. Started in Malaysia as a startup, got its funding and growth within Singapore's ecosystem and cocoon of growing companies very safely. But the reason Grab was successful, similar to the idea of guanxi, is the different services it offered. So similar to Uber Eats, food, it started very early with food delivery, package delivery. One of the worst traffic in the world, Istanbul is bad, Jakarta is worse. So that will give you an idea how bad it is. 3 hours from the airport to the center of town. If it rains, you may be looking at 4+ hours to get to the town center. So that's why motorbikes are very key. One of the other things is around helicopters, which I'll touch on for Indonesia. So again, moving from geotagging, AR, VR, this is Ready Player One, for those that might not know, Spielberg's new film. L'Oreal acquired Modiface very recently. And what is Modiface? Makeup. It's the whole augmented reality and putting different, similar to how clothes testing you can do, this is doing it with makeup. Massive purchase. And again, if you look at the whole AR, VR headset, IDC predicts there's probably 13 million units now, 81 million by 2021. That's the yearly shipment it's estimating of AR and VR headsets that will just come. Again, a tsunami of data transfer and digital channels that are being managed very well, in my opinion, in Asia. Again, VR, this is an example from China. Again, tagging and visuals with mobile is becoming very, very commonplace in Chinese retail and commerce. And Baidu is doing this for tourism. But in terms of a lot of historic sites, you'll see it quite common in certain places in the West, pretty much most of China. There's a huge push in terms of AR, VR, in terms of enabling historical site visits and also selling as well to commerce.
首先要解决就是在一幅场景里边或者图像上去找到人脸在什么地方。我们要对这个人脸呢进行关键点的定位，我们需要定位出他的眼角以及鼻尖、鼻翼和嘴角。描述完了以后呢，我们要去到库里面去做人脸的比对。我认为呢，就是说人们在生活当中呢，既有安全的问题，也有隐私的问题。但是当两者产生矛盾的时候呢，对于中国人来说，可能更侧重于安全。因为你没有了安全的，一切都没有了。
So I mentioned SenseTime, which is the Chinese, now the most valuable AI startup in the world, $3 billion. Huge ethical questions, clearly, around the state watching population so closely. Huge impact on commerce. If you can imagine, a shop can recognize you as you come in, track that back to your social media feeds, know exactly what you like, and dynamically change what it serves in terms of the visuals, the electronic ads, massive tailorization to the consumer. But we're seeing this very much in China. That's why one of the things I mentioned, and a lot of the discussions through today is around the impact of this move to the east. From the Chinese perspective, I think it's going to be interesting for the world because as they grow and they become much more global, and we're working with some of the large Chinese cloud giants, they're not pulling back on their liberal versus currently how they exist way of doing business and living. You would have seen President Xi ended the term limits for himself. China is going to continue being China, and also around the control they have around the tech companies. This is going to raise quite interesting questions, I think, globally, as these companies grow, but that's not for this presentation. A call out to Perna around Cortana, because I think AI is prevalent, and I think a lot of the assistants are being used across Southeast Asia, and we see it. We did a roundtable in Shanghai, and a lot of the companies, we had about 30 different companies there. We didn't know any of the names. Each of them must have been 100, 200 million revenue. So you can very much, in terms of the startup world, you can become a unicorn, as the West, Silicon Valley likes to coin it, within China. They can become unicorns without ever coming out. What's interesting, though, is when we tell them that we're working with BAT, Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent, they want to come out. They want to become the next wave of these Chinese companies going west. Of course, LinkedIn. Social selling across the whole of Asia Pacific and very intelligent. You'll see India, China, and Indonesia, massive penetration. Japan, interestingly, not too keen. They don't like to promote themselves, so you don't see a huge amount there. But generally, in terms of South Asia, we're seeing a continuation of this Uberification of everything. And I don't know if it was Tom Goodwin, somebody said this, but and the Uberification of everything develops, as I mentioned earlier. If you look at Jakarta, you can now order via app a helicopter. It's HeliCity as a startup, and when you've got 3 to 4 hour type traffic requirements, this is becoming a very popular app in that region. So I just wanted to end and look a little bit at metrics as we move on, and why this is happening. Why is this, as we discussed with Peter and Perna earlier, this shift happening? It's quite simple if you look at the numbers. So if you look at the top left, 7.5 billion people in the world, 4 billion internet users. Asia Pacific alone accounts for 1.9 billion internet users. What's more impressive than that, and the bottom right, is Southeast Asia alone. So if you look at the top right, internet users globally, about 7% growth. Southeast Asia, there's 31% internet usage growth in 1 year. That's, my math isn't great, but that's more than 3 times the global average. Even more impressive is the mobile subscription and mobile social users. Again, 36% versus 10, 14% globally. And the geographical shift to mobile, if you look at the stats given by GSMA, there's going to be over 1 billion more people using mobile by 2020. And 10 countries are going to account for 70%. If you look at the top 3 countries, India, China, Indonesia, that's where the mobile users are coming. And that's why we're seeing this shift. Internet users in China, I don't know how many stats you want, 753 million mobile users. The US population obviously is about 325. So their mobile user base alone is double the US population base. Again, if you look at mobile internet access, 95% are accessing internet via mobile in China. Massive percentage. They've completely shifted out the middle ground around laptop or traditional access points. And then the West versus China in terms of the brands, just to give you a feel, I'm sure you've heard a lot of them. Google is Baidu, Facebook is WeChat, YouTube is Youku, eBay is Taobao, Amazon is Tmall, and Twitter is Weibo. Everything has got a version in China. And then the three giants, Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent. These are the ones that are driving all the growth. And these are the names that you'll see more and more. We're seeing them come into Silicon Valley. We're seeing them come into New York. We're seeing them come into London. We see them come into Amsterdam, Frankfurt. Alibaba just came into Turkey, you would have seen, very recently with their cloud product, with Aliyun. And the reason, again, I don't know how to reiterate this more, is because they're sitting on such a huge pool of data. So the reason Facebook, Google, and the others can develop AI so progressively is because of their data. On WeChat alone, 229 billion messages sent via WeChat over Chinese New Year. That's 38 billion per day. And I'm going to jump to my last charts. A little bit about the future of data centers. A few exciting stuff again to point around Microsoft. One of the things they're trying to do is server technology on the seabed. Top one is an interesting one ecologically. Huge amount of plastic in the seas. Google has painted a data center that will go on sea and recycle the huge lakes and islands of plastic, unfortunately, in our seas. And the right one is something we're working with the Singapore government, is going skyscraper data centers. Technology to protect, so huge around physical and logical security. Drone protection is something we're looking at quite aggressively. And this is a data center in Iceland. No cooling at all, just again the skyscraper model. And then, of course, Mars. So if Musk gets to Mars, which I believe he will, one of the first things that's going to be needed at the bottom, you'll see a Swedish company has actually looked at a modular data center that will be straight available when they land on Mars and enable connectivity and connections. This is an interesting one for those that are interested. NorseCorp.com. You can see live DDoS attacks in the world. Cybersecurity is going to be a big, big issue. It's a huge issue in Asia and China. Politically, it's very interesting. You can see which country is attacking which one. And this was what caused the DNS crash about a year and a half ago when some of the large US commerce sites went down, was because there was DDoS attacks onto their domain name providers. And again, I want to end my last slides, promise, on Turkey. As I said at the start, very close to my heart, but not for sentimental reasons. I think Turkey is absolutely critical for Europe, it's critical for Asia, and it's always been a gateway. There's a reason for that. Now, with the One Belt, One Road, as China develops and sells to the West, huge infrastructure investments into Turkey. But more than that, again, if you look at the stats that made Southeast Asia and the emerging markets interesting, we see the same stats here. Europe is getting old. Western Europe's getting very old. If you look at Turkey, median age is 31 years of age. If you look at mobile penetration, again, you're looking at very high stats compared to Europe. And then my friends, sometimes they anger me. They said, well, then give me one stat where Turkey is 1 or 2 in the world. So I give them that one. Mobile banking penetration, there's China, there's India, Turkey is number 2. That's why when we go to any presentation in Asia, if we go and speak to Oracle, if we go and speak to any of the large tech providers, the mobile banking case studies they provide are from Turkey. So Turkey is innovating, Turkey is developing, and it's an exciting time to be alive. So please follow me, and thank you very much.